It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com and at a number of podcast providers online. On the 3rd of January 1970, Doctor Who changed forever. After the epic conclusion of the 10-part serial, The War Games, viewers finally saw the Time Lords, the race of the people that the Doctor came from, and due to the Doctor's breaking of Time Lord law and interfering with the course of natural progression of history for several different races of beings across several different planets and galaxies, the Time Lords sentenced the Doctor to a forced regeneration. Then, 6 months later, on that cold, early January evening, Patrick Troughton's replacement, the third Doctor, would then be seen in action for the first time. But as much as Jon Pertwee, the man who took up the mantle of the Doctor, is my favorite of all the incarnations and just the super awesomest, that's not really what changed Doctor Who forever. Starting with that 7th season on January 3rd, 1970, Doctor Who would be seen on film and, more importantly, in color for the first time. The first story starring Pertwee was Spearhead from Space. That established the tone of Pertwee's first 3 years as the Doctor. And by the time of Pertwee's second serial and the topic of this week's Monster Mondays, Doctor Who and the Silurians, we would not only be more accustomed to this new tone, but soaking in the influence of that tone. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about that title, Doctor Who and the Silurians. While it was absolutely a relatively regular thing to have titles starting with Doctor Who and seen on the cover of the famous novelizations that were published by Target Books, and it wasn't uncommon to see that show up on scripts while they were being worked out behind the scenes, Doctor Who and the Silurians was the only time that form of titling was ever seen on people's television screens. Yes, the two Doctor Who movies from Amicus Productions, Doctor Who and the Daleks and Doctor Who and the Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD, use that titling scheme, but the official series on the BBC never did, except for here. This is also one of those times in which the novelization did not use the title of the story as the book's title. For the novelization, which I had when I was a kid, the story was titled Doctor Who and the Cave Monsters. So, how's about that? And I believe the reason why Doctor Who and the Silurians kept that title was that it ended up being published on the scripts, the final scripts that everybody was working with, and it just leaked into the title itself. Nobody stopped it along the way to just rename it the Silurians. So, one of those interesting little bits of trivia about this show. But anyway, we're going to be spending the entire month of August looking at Jon Pertwee stories from that classic Doctor Who era. And I had covered one of his stories before, the Daemons, but it seems I've spent way more time covering other Doctor stories and not enough time covering my favorite Doctor. So we're going to fix that. And since we have two stories from his 7th season, let's talk about the state of Doctor Who coming into this pivotal 7th season. As part of his sentencing from the Time Lords, the Doctor is exiled to Earth, and it's said that the knowledge of time travel was more or less cut out of his mind. Now, my words, not theirs, but it's like they kind of lobotomized the secrets of the TARDIS out of his memory. Now that later becomes something more of a physical thing as he endeavors to have a time circuit put back into his TARDIS to allow for him to pilot it away from modern day Earth. But I digress. Going into this season, producer and story editor Derek Sherwin was tasked to set up what Doctor Who was going to look like for the 70s. And it wasn't exactly looking like the series was going to survive the end of the 60s at first. And he learned that the BBC was looking to create a Quatermass series to replace Doctor Who. So he met the BBC halfway. The whole Quatermass Thing, a horror sci-fi series of serials that were popular in the 50s and became hits for Hammer Films, would ultimately serve as heavy inspiration for this new era of Doctor Who. The Doctor would be stuck on Earth. He'd work closely with Sherwin's creation unit, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, that we discussed back when I talked about the Cyberman story, The Invasion, and the sci-fi monsters would basically come to the Doctor, and that would turn out to be a major hit for the BBC. Pertwee's Doctor was more suave. He was confident. He had a tinge of the first Doctor's grumpiness. He had a tiny bit of James Bond flair for action and automobiles. The new attitude of Doctor Who for the 70s would kick off with this serial, as new producer Barry Letts would take over the show and arguably oversee one of the greatest jumps in popularity in the series' history. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this story's main antagonist, the Silurians, a bit later, because they are turned out to be kind of a pretty important part of Doctor Who and a relatively famous scientific hypothesis, and I suppose kind of a character that's central in conspiracy theories too. But this is a 7-part serial, and we need to get moving because this is a pretty long one. As is often the case with Doctor Who stories from the classic era, this serial begins not with the Doctor, but with some poor unfortunate souls who are going to encounter the baddies before the Doctor has any idea what's going on. In fact, it's going to be about an hour or so before the Doctor really figures out what's going on in this story. But in this case, it's a pair of what look like miners in a cave. They're not miners, actually, but they are workers at a plant that happens to be near these caves and within the caves as well. But one is killed by what appears to be a dinosaur while the other runs away. We then shift to the Doctor, who is working on building his jalopy that he's named Bessie. His companion of this era, Liz Shaw, working in the science department of UNIT, delivers a message to the Doctor from the Brigadier to drive out to the countryside to investigate some strange goings-on at a nuclear power cyclotron station. Now, you see, they have had strange power drains and workers are having mental breakdowns. Not all the workers, just some of them. But this plant is on the verge of discovering a way to provide cheap electrical power by way of a new particle accelerator. The security chief of the plant, Major Baker, believes there is sabotage afoot. The Brigadier believes this is a little more extraordinary, which is why he's there with UNIT and the Doctor. Now, very quickly, Liz starts to experience headaches and dizziness, which the Doctor takes note of. And he also takes note of how hushed everything is around the survivor from the opening scene. Now, the Doctor visits with the survivor, whose name is Spencer, and he's basically just in this crazed state. He tries to throttle Dr. Meredith, the local doctor from the hospital at the nearby village that's looking after him. And he also tries to strangle the Doctor himself. He just draws fantastical creatures on his room's walls. Now, the Doctor believes Spencer's mind has basically been devolved by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. The scientific head of the facility, Quinn, Dr. Quinn, seems to be aware of whatever is in the caves and wants to basically exploit it for his own gain in terms of knowledge. The Doctor is already quite worried about what is going on at this facility. But after Liz explains her headache and dizziness as being a feeling of oppression, the Doctor tries to figure out why only some humans are affected by this feeling whenever they're in the cyclotron room. But he thinks it all has to do with the caves, not the cyclotron itself. So he, after learning about the claw marks found on the dead guy's body, he decides to descend into the caves himself. And there he comes face to face with what appears to be a dinosaur. But that dinosaur is oddly called away by a series of audible tones, and this allows the Doctor to venture further into the caves. And when the Doctor returns, he tells Baker, the Brigadier, and Liz what he experienced. Now, he didn't quite get a good look at the monster, but Baker believes that the saboteur is creating something that looks like a monster to scare people. And the sounds that the doctor explained he heard is coming from some sort of machinery. Baker, in the cave with the doctor, the brigadier, and a few unit guys, sees something that looked like a man off in the shadows and attempted to shoot him. But whatever this thing is, be it a man or some other type of creature, it ended up escaping. Now, the doctor takes Baker and some blood samples back to the surface while the brigadier and his squad goes on the lookout. While examining the blood, the doctor and Liz realize the cells look like they come from what would typically be seen in larger reptile species. The doctor believes there are two different creatures in the cave, the larger one that is used to defend the caves and a smaller one that controls the creature and may not necessarily be hostile. May just be using the monster to basically ward people away from it. Now, whatever it was Baker shot at has come to the surface and into a nearby village, and Quinn goes into the caves and makes contact with whatever that more intelligent creature species is. And Quinn is in cahoots with this group of creatures. They give him info about them while he tries to stave off their discovery. However, these creatures are messing with the power supply of the facility, and it has brought soldiers, which has escalated basically everything by having one of the creatures being wounded by those human soldiers, and is quickly starting to get out of either side's control from getting much, much worse, which is a big part of the entirety of this series, is this kind of escalation, this always escalating march towards a confrontation. Now, the wounded creature is found by a farmer and is forced to kill him when the farmer holds like a pitchfork up to it. And the doctor tells the brigadier and the head of the facility, Dr. Lawrence, that the cyclotron is working perfectly. Actually, everything here is working perfectly, but whatever it is that is affecting the cyclotron, the power, and the workers, is something external. The doctor, Liz, and the brigadier go to investigate the dead farmer, and the doctor says that the claw marks on his body is not the cause of this guy's death. It was heart failure. He says that the man died from fear, which also indicates that maybe these creatures aren't necessarily by nature violent. Now, the wife, suffering from shock, is shown a drawing of the creature that attacked her husband, and she confirms that is what she saw, and it remained in the barn, exactly where Liz stayed behind to gather forensic samples. The creature then sneaks up on Liz and attacks her, but Liz is not seriously injured, and the doctor and the brigadier arrive to get her medical assistance and to search the barn for the creature. Quinn also heads to the farm with a device that the underground civilization gave him to communicate with the creature to recall him to the caves. Unit is now on the hunt for the creature. Quinn is also trying to use his device to call the creature to him to help him return to the caves. However, both sides are surprisingly close to one another, which is tipping some of the unit folks off to there being some sort of strange noise out in the field outside the farm and the village and near the cave entrance. The doctor and the brigadier drive towards where they believe the strange signal sound was coming from, and they find strange biped footprints next to a pair of car tracks. And the doctor is now keen to there being some sort of conspiracy here. So he decides to go straight to Dr. Quinn's home to confront him. The doctor, before leaving, notices that Quinn's home central heating unit, which he says is kind of surprising to see in an older house like this. It's set similarly to a reptile house at the zoo. In other words, it's quite warm inside his house. And when he gets back to the facility and goes into Quinn's office, the doctor and Liz find a globe of the Earth, but it's actually from the Silurian era, before the continental divide. He tries to talk to Quinn's assistant, but they are interrupted by the brigadier, and she opts to give no further information. Both she and the doctor try to convince Quinn to let all this go and either not trust the underground creatures or try to help each other to prevent a full-scale escalation in the caves that could lead to a lot of death. And when the doctor arrives, he finds Quinn dead in his home. And when he activates the device that sends out the audible signal, he comes face to face with the creature that everyone's been looking for, a Silurian. Now, the doctor greets the Silurian with kindness, and the Silurian does not attack him. He asks how people can help this creature, and when the Silurian is spooked by a passing car and storms off, the doctor tries to appeal to the creature by saying that if they can't tell him what they want, the humans will likely try to destroy the Silurians. And back at the facility, Major Baker is determined to find and kill whatever it was that is sabotaging the facility in the caves. And he goes down alone and discovers a trio of Silurians, and he tries to shoot at them, but they attack. And the doctor later reveals that Quinn is dead and that he feels the facility needs to be shut down and remain closed pending a careful scientific investigation. He tells Liz what he saw and how he communicated with the Silurian, and they are not hostile creatures. They only attack when they feel threatened. But in the caves, the doctor and Liz attempt to explore to find more of them to understand their intention. The doctor uses Quinn's device to basically open up passageways to lead into the Silurian's primary, essentially base of operation within the caves. Now they find Baker in a cell who reveals that the Silurians are asking him a lot of questions about the population of Earth, their food, etc. Baker believes the Silurians are planning a full-scale invasion, and they see a Silurian being woken up from an ancient hibernation chamber thing, which is the source of the power drainages at the facility. Now, there's problems all over the place at this point. The facility is under threat of closure by permanent Undersecretary Masters, who has arrived to do his own thorough investigation. There are monsters in the caves. There are military people ready for a war with whatever is in the caves. There are career men trying to hold on to their careers running the facility who progressively get crazier and crazier and more villainous as we go on. Everything is escalating. And in the caves, the Silurians reveal, while Baker is listening, that they killed Quinn for trying to keep one of their own in his home, almost like a experiment or a pet. And there is a power struggle between a younger Silurian and an older elder who leads the group about whether or not they try to find common ground or if they should wipe out humanity. The doctor goes into the caves to warn the Silurians to meet the unit soldiers in peace, but a war-hungry Silurian seeking to take over the Earth and destroy humanity tells him that he's destroyed them and now plans to kill the doctor. But the struggle within the Silurians about how to interact with humanity and the modern world is one of ideology. The elder Silurian, the one who is currently in control and in command, wants to listen to the doctor and try to achieve peace. A younger Silurian is less interested in working with humanity and thinks conquest is the only path forward for their race. The elder of the two agrees to free the doctor and attempt to de-escalate the rising tension. The doctor tries to tell the elder that in the years since the Silurians went into hibernation, primates evolved into humanity, and they're the ones who are in control of the planet. What the Silurians went underground to avoid is the belief that a small planet or some sort of celestial body was going to crash into the Earth, and they decided they would go underground and return to recolonize what remained after that collision. But the doctor said that never happened. The small object actually was the moon. It became captured by the Earth, and they never collided. The elder agrees to trying to figure out a way to share this planet. Basically, what the doctor suggests would be the Silurians can take the hottest places on Earth that humans are less willing to inhabit or develop for themselves. Meanwhile, the younger Silurian is talking about wanting to usurp leadership, and he decides to act on his own and infects Baker with a virus that will spread amongst humanity. And it was a form of biological warfare that they used in the past when apes would invade their crops. The elder frees the doctor with the virus to basically use that to help reverse engineer a cure. And that ultimately is the last straw for the younger Silurian, who kills the elder. And on the surface, people are starting to die from the Silurian virus. Now, the doctor and Liz begin injecting people with antibiotics to basically stave off the worst parts of the infection while they search for a cure. Meanwhile, Undersecretary Masters has returned to London after feeling some ill effects, indicating that he is infected and now in one of the most populated cities in Europe. The Silurians are aware that the doctor is working on a cure, but the younger Silurian doesn't believe humans are capable of solving their science. But just in case, they are going to capture the doctor. A Silurian starts attacking unit guys stationed throughout the caves, and as infected people in London start dropping dead, the doctor discovers the formula that works as a cure. And as he's transcribing the formula, and before he can finish it to get it over to Liz and the Brigadier so that they can start transmitting it to hospitals and to authorities, a pair of Silurians enter his lab and take him captive as Silurians begin breaking through all of UNIT's barriers. The doctor is questioned about how many humans have survived the Silurian epidemic. However, UNIT is aware that he's missing and that the Silurians are on the move. And in order to save the lives of the Brigadier and all of the people in the nuclear facility, the doctor is returned, but with the Silurians with him. They plan to use the nuclear reactor to disperse microwaves that of the Silurian era. And this would essentially destroy the Van Allen belt. And the result will be to kill humanity by basically baking them in the now unfiltered radiation from the sun. The doctor dupes the Silurians by making them believe that he set up the reactor to do what they want. It does require that the younger Silurians stay behind to operate the system so that it will continue to disperse the radiation. So he sends his people back into hibernation to stay behind to make sure that everything is going to go as they plan. Now, the Silurian leader then, once he figures out that this is not going the way that he was told by the doctor it would, he attempts to kill the doctor for the betrayal of the plan, but the Brigadier kills the Silurian leader. The doctor then demands that the caves be left alone so that he and Liz can study the technology there and possibly revive the Silurians for a permanent peace. The Brigadier instead has the place rigged to explode, and when they believe the doctor has left the area, they set off the explosion. However, Bessie broke down nearby, so he witnessed the explosion and what he believes is the death of the entire group of Silurians. Liz ultimately admits that she knew the government was concerned and didn't want to take any chances with this being a re-escalation the moment the Silurians came to again. But the doctor believes this to be nothing less than genocide. The serial ends with the doctor driving away in anger. Now, let's talk about 3 things I like about Doctor Who and the Silurians. First, I really like the tone of the serial. I mentioned in the other times I covered the Third Doctor, when I looked at the Damons, that there was a very Hammer horror feel to it. And it's kind of the same thing here. While not necessarily the same gothic horror level as Hammer had, but what Hammer did in some of their other horrors, as well as what their main competitors were making at the time. These are what I like to call the horror / sci-fi / mystery films in the British countryside. This isn't a monster rampaging through London or another major metropolitan center. There is this mystery about who might be involved with the larger concerns or the horror. There is a kind of higher brow concept about exactly what's going on. It's not as simple as a vampire or a mummy or a Frankenstein or some sort of witch that's wandering about and causing all of the things to happen. There's something ancient and older that would, of course, be centralized in an out-of-the-way and remote area. Also, there's like a science element to this, the nuclear cyclotron that's trying to create energy for people. I mean, that's a very technical and scientific concept that they were bringing up in this, but I really dig this sort of stuff. It gives it that sort of remote feeling, which is always good when dealing with horror. You're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. In terms of the fantasy or science fiction element, being out in the middle of nowhere makes it at least somewhat plausible that you might find something new or different that you never knew existed or wouldn't have found in more populated areas. Also, people out in the middle of nowhere or in small villages might have different motivations or ideas that the more quote-unquote civilized people of cities or whatever would have. So that provides some mystery to what these people are all about. And it's all a pretty good mix of these ideas and becomes engaging on that level. Next, this is a classic Doctor Who type of story. This is about xenophobia and mastery over a planet. In this case, it just happens to be the planet Earth. But both the humans and the Silurians believe they have rights to own the planet. Both are willing to kill for that right. Humanity is willing to use the weapons of our time, guns, bombs, that sort of stuff. The Silurians have different forms of weaponry, which include biological agents like viruses and bacteria and psionic powers. They both have the capacity for a large body account, but when the Brigadier, despite the Doctor pleading to not, blows up the mines, there's a legitimate look of anger and disappointment that he couldn't help find peace. He couldn't help talk to these intelligent beings more and learn from them. It's a fantastic encapsulation of what this new Earthbound era of Doctor Who would be for the first 2.5, 3 years of Pertwee's run. It's a level head with scientific knowledge butting up against a military leader and the much more base human desire to smash things instead of understand them. And that continues to evolve throughout this entire run with the Third Doctor and Unit. It also properly showed how the Silurians were basically the same as humanity. It almost puts a negative spin on evolution, since both sides had great technology and knowledge, only for it to basically be turned toward warfare, destruction, occupation, conquest. I mean, this is one of those great concepts, not just in Doctor Who, but also in Star Trek and science fiction as a whole. And it was maybe one of the earliest examples of this type of story that I could really understand. By the time this aired on my local PBS station, I was old enough to really finally get it for the first time and have seen the same type of story in so many other science fiction settings. So it's a really cool type of story that I really interact with well. Now, thirdly, let's talk about the Silurians themselves. These creatures are a wonderful creation of this early era of Doctor Who. It expands on the history of Earth within the world of the series. The idea of something that bridges the dinosaurs and the bipedal human is fascinating to think about. Being reptilian, it doesn't seem to be too far from the idea that they could possibly live in caves, deep underground, someplace warm, someplace, that they would be more fitting for their biology. Was it possible that this, I should say that there has been long, conjecture and thought experiments on whether or not humanity was the first advanced civilization on the planet. So was it possible that this planet had something of an advanced being prior to the rise of humans? Was it possible they lived side by side with dinosaurs or just after? If so, what were their advancements? A lot of this played out in a relatively recent hypothesis called the Silurian hypothesis. That hypothesis actually takes its inspiration from the serial. And at the very least, it takes the name from the serial. Silurians were surprisingly underused despite their very cool reptilian look and their great first appearance. An offshoot, the Sea Devils, a creature that was an amphibian version of the Silurians, got their own serial a couple of years after this one. And about 10 years after that, the Sea Devils and the Silurians returned in a much reviled Fifth Doctor serial called Warriors from the Deep. And they would return later in the new era in episodes featuring the 11th, 12th, and 13th Doctors. And in the new era, the Silurians received a modern update while still keeping their general bipedal reptilian look and motivations. And a new series spinning off from Doctor Who called The War Between the Land and the Sea will bring back the Sea Devils with an updated look. Now, whether or not the Silurians will appear is yet to be known at the time of recording this, but the Silurians were just a really cool design. And yes, you can tell that this guy is wearing a bodysuit with a mask over the top. There are a couple of shots where you can see the mask isn't quite covering up the double-sided tape that's meant to keep it down on the actor's body piece, but whatever. Doesn't matter. They're very cool design. They were always a really striking look to them. The fact that they have 3 eyes, the third eye is where they use their psionic powers. It's really cool. And it's a great idea about another advanced species on this planet who has just as much claim to the planet as we do. It makes for what happens at the end of the serial that much more thought-provoking and unfortunate as well, because we just wiped them out. We didn't even bother to see if there was peace. We just acted first, and while they were sleeping, no less. So that was even more unfortunate and almost cowardly of unit to do ultimately. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload this stuff to YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next time, we go to another 7-part serial from the very first season of Jon Pertwee's Third Doctor era and jump over to the alternate reality of Inferno. And until next week, stay spooky.